joined today by Dr. Anirban Basu, Chief Economist with Associated Builders and Contractors, also known as ABC. Can you speak to ABC's latest construction backlog indicator plus contractor confidence index and what they tell us about the state of the construction industry?
I think they, in the aggregate, tell us that construction is busier than one might have thought. So typically, construction has been one of the last industries to recover after recessions. There's a lag. But this was different. First, construction didn't suffer quite as much as many other industries, like leisure, hospitality, and retail trade, for instance, because it was deemed an essential industry. So a lot of construction work continued. Second, the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States has been injecting massive amounts of money supply into the economy through its quantitative easing program, $120 billion in bond purchases per month. And that is ongoing, though there's some talk now that that's going to be tapered, that's going to level off somewhat. We'll see. But the point is that the investment markets are flush with liquidity and that investors are looking to deploy cash looking for return. As one of the issues here, of course, is that interest rates are very low. And so one of the places in which to deploy cash, use cash, or invest cash is in real estate and construction. So because of all this liquidity, because of the low cost of capital, even though materials prices are high, even though construction workers are hard to find, we see a fair amount of construction starts out there. And so the construction industry is pretty busy. Contractors are pretty confident. They're telling us that their backlog has grown a lot since the worst of the downturn. They're telling us that they expect sales to grow in the next 6 months, employment to grow in the next 6 months, and even profit margins to grow in the next 6 months, which I find to be remarkable because input prices, meaning materials prices, look around concrete, for instance, or diesel fuel, or all kinds of input prices are rising in cost, and people are becoming more expensive too. And yet, there's enough demand for construction out there that the purchasers of construction services are willing to pay enough to allow these contractors to generate some meaningful profit margin. So people are pretty confident right now going into 2022.
Well, that is good news. Before we end, last question, unrelated to the workforce topic, too. What other notable trends stick out in your mind related to restoration contractors, for better or worse?
Well, I think you're going to see a ton of adaptive reuse of existing structures, right? So one of the things we saw as an example was that many retailers went bankrupt. So in February of last year, Pier 1 Imports went bankrupt. As an example, in April, True Religion, the supplier of those fabulous jeans that make everyone look slender, they go bankrupt. Then in May, Neiman Marcus, J. Crew, J.C. Penney go bankrupt. In June, GNC goes bankrupt. Then Brooks Brothers goes bankrupt in July. In August, Lord & Taylor, that Howell department store, goes bankrupt. In December, Francesca's, an apparel retailer that appeals to young women, for instance, so they go bankrupt. So lots of bankruptcy, and that translates into a lot of vacant space. Now, we know that there's remote work as well. That translates more vacant office space. We know that business travel is not returned yet, and that can translate in some pretty underutilized hotels and conference centers. So there's going to be a lot of searching out there for adaptive reuse of existing properties. But if, let's say, you have a vacant department store and you want to turn that into an outpatient center, my goodness, that place has got to be sterilized, it's got to be cleaned, it's got to be ready for that next purpose. And so even though that space might be in good shape for retail purposes, it might not be ready for a healthcare application or for a data center or for a manufacturing facility where it has to be dust-free, that kind of thing. I think there's a lot of room out there for contractors to go into those kinds of spaces and remediate. And here's the other thing, climate change. So we've seen more flooding, of course, more damage to buildings. We saw what happened recently in Middle Tennessee, for instance, a lot of loss of life, of course, and a lot of structures that were damaged. But we see that with wildfires in other parts of the country, so on and so forth. So I would tell you, R&R stands to be one of the more rapidly growing industries going forward for all kinds of reasons. Adaptive reuse is one of them, and climate change is another.